automatically stop at the other end of what they had determined their territory was. So when we were going through, there was a mother goat and 2 kids, and they were very persistent. Kind of a nuisance, really.
Well, welcome to Third Thursday. I'm sure those of you who've been joining us can tell you could looking forward to a very interesting and entertaining evening. So like I said, welcome to Third Thursday, Exploring the Outdoors. This is program number 2 of this year-long series. Tonight, we're going to look at and talk about life after the thru hike on the Appalachian Trail. My name is Barbara Dickinson. I'm the Executive Director of the Friends of Handley Regional Library. The Friends have been around since 1977 to support the public library. At beginning, it was the Handley Library in downtown Winchester. Now it's a 3-part Handley Regional Library system with a branch at the Bowman Library in Stevens City, and Berryville, Virginia also has a branch. We support by raising funds for the library, but the Friends have always worked to provide free programming and to be a resource for the communities we serve to create connections for information and entertainment. So after this very informative and entertaining program, feel free to go to your library, check out a book about hikes in your area or a magazine about backpacking, and keep your creativity alive. We all love that here. A few details before we begin. I'll ask that if you have questions or comments, please put them in the chat or comment area on Facebook or on Zoom, and we'll get to those at the end of the presentation. Also, a big thank you to our friends at Mountain Trails in downtown Winchester and in Front Royal for being a sponsor of this entire series. So it's my great pleasure to introduce our host for this season, Susan Shearhart. She's an avid hiker, backpacker, and scout leader, and creative spark for the many topics you'll be enjoying throughout this season. And Susan will introduce this evening's guests. Susan.
Well, thank you, Barbara, and thank you to the library and Mountain Trails for sponsoring the series. It's been great fun getting to know everyone, and we have a lot of really interesting guests coming up over the next few months. So I hope you'll all check out the upcoming topics. Every third Thursday we'll be here. And tonight we're exploring the lifelong impact of an AT thru hike, including how trail communities such as Front Royal shape the experiences of hikers along the AT. And Benton McKay, who was one of the architects of the Appalachian Trail, envisioned a series of recreational communities throughout the Appalachian chain of mountains from Maine to Georgia. These to be connected by a walking trail to establish a base for a more extensive and systematic development of outdoor community life. And the AT Community Program of the Appalachian Trail Conservancy, which manages the whole Appalachian Trail, is one way that vision is becoming a reality. And Front Royal and Warren County here is an Appalachian Trail community. We were designated in 2012. And so tonight, I have guests who actually were part of that process of Front Royal being designated as an Appalachian Trail. And that was spearheaded by the lovely Sonia Karlberg. She's a thru-hiker from the class of the year 2000. And also Scott Jenkins, thru-hiker from the class of 2012, along with his lovely wife, Lisa. And they own the Mountain Home Bed and Breakfast here in Front Royal. So first, we're going to talk about that lifelong impact of a thru hike. And then at the end, we're actually going to go back and talk about their actual hikes, because I'm sure some of you might be interested in some of those details. And then around 7:30, we will then take questions from all of you. So feel free to throw them in the chat box and we'll definitely get to them. So we're going to start with one of my favorite questions, and that is your trail name. So this is a tradition on the Appalachian Trail that you either earn from, in some kind of fun way, a nickname, and that ends up being the name you go by while you're hiking. So why don't we start with Sonia, if you'd like to share that story with us.
Okay, well, fun way. Mine was not really fun the way I got my trail name. My trail name ended up being Scirocco, and many people ask me if it was after the car. I guess Volkswagen or somebody had a car that was called a Scirocco, and that is not how I got the name. But I was carrying, at that time in 2000, they were just starting to make packs that fit women, especially. So they had different hip belts and, smaller shoulders and that sort of thing. But the engineering was not very advanced at that time. And we started our hike in Harpers Ferry in early April. and went south, and then went north to Maine and came south again to Harpers Ferry. So starting in Harpers Ferry, I started getting the suspension on my pack, which was a women's pack. It was called a low Shearhart pack. Was so primitive that I was getting a migraine every single day. And I thought, oh, I'm not going to be able to do this. I can't hike this trail having a migraine every day for 6 months. So as luck would have it, on our second night, we were at an actual at Bear's Den, which is, there are actual people there, and they host. It's like a hostel for hikers on the trail. And there was a trail angel there. And trail angels are regular people who just decide to be good Samaritans and help out hikers. And so there was a trail angel there named Fanny Pack. That was his trail name. And I mentioned that I was having this problem with my pack to him. And a couple days later, he showed up at another shelter, two shelters, 2 days south of us. He figured out where we were, and he had hiked in. And since I was still having trouble with my pack, he stayed the night in the shelter with us. And then the next day, he drove us all the way into Arlington for me to purchase a new backpack. And so I was able to replace my backpack. I hiked with my hiking partner, Amy, AKA Aimless. I used her pack for a couple of days just to see how it worked. And it was an Osprey, which they have the best suspension system out there on the trail. And that pack worked really well, even though it wasn't quite the right size for me. So when after purchasing the pack, he said, I think your trail name should be Shearhart after your pack. So that's how I got my But it wasn't really a fun way.
No, but it's probably one of the best examples of trail magic.
Yes,
the kindness of a stranger coming, hiking in, finding you, and then driving you to an outfitter in Arlington, of all places.
Yeah,
so
and that all the way back. Yeah,
all the way back. I mean, that's awesome. That's a great story. I love it.
Yeah.
Scott?
I didn't really earn mine. I kind of chose one for myself. In the lead up to our southbound hike, we went down to North Carolina to visit our daughter for Easter. And in the church service on Easter morning, the pastor was telling a story about a teacher who was asking her students what they would want to be known by. If you could be called anything, what would you want to be called? And one little girl raises her hand and says, I want to be called possible, because my mother always says I'm impossible. I nudged Lisa and I said, that's a good trail name, because it matched. So my trail name is Possible. And that matches with my philosophy that if you have faith, determination, and persistence, anything's possible. Which when you're doing a through hike, you've got to think that way. You've got to overcome a lot of adversity, and you've got to be determined. And some days you just have to push through the pain and the bad weather and the aggravation to get to the next day, which will be better. So Possible helps me to kind of stay grounded and have a positive mindset while I'm out doing things.
Awesome.
And then we decided to open this bed and breakfast, and we needed a name for our company. So Scott looked at a number of names. One was It's Possible, but that was already taken in Virginia. So we picked Anything's Possible, LLC. And then once we'd opened the cabin, people started asking me, well, what's your trail name? And I said, well, I didn't really hike the whole trail. They said, oh, no, you should have a trail name. And I said, well, I guess it's anything, because when you run a place like this, you have to be able to do anything that's needed, shuttling, cooking, cleaning, putting heat tape on pipes, scraping, painting, because ours is a house that we had to renovate as well. So anything worked for me.
So I see you. Anything's possible together. Awesome. I love it. All right. Thank you for sharing those stories. I'm always curious as to how they come about. Thank you for that. Now I want to get to, because you both hiked a while ago, and I want to get to what was your why? Like, why did you decide at that point in your life to undertake the through hike? So what was your inspiration and your why? Like, why at that point, and was there a particular purpose or reason or something you wanted to gain from the experience? And we'll just do that part first, and then we'll talk about if you actually realized it, but just what was the why first?
Okay.
So I always knew I wanted to hike the trail from a very young age. I'm from Illinois originally, and I read a book of an anthology of thru-hikers accounts of their hikes. And after reading these accounts, you know, they were all things like got chased by a bear today, rained for 5 days, sprained my ankle, ran out of food, you know, got bitten by a tick. And when I finished the book, I thought, that's for me. I can't wait to do that. And so, but the years went by, and you know, I kept reading about the trail and thinking about it. And you know, being in Illinois, we didn't have any mountains. The highest hill is like 300 feet. You know, but finally, I got to be in my early 40s, and I had kind of come to a turning point in my career, and I didn't know what I wanted to do next. I had done a lot of research, sort of what color is your parachute, you know, over a 2-year period. And finally I decided, now is the time to go on this trail, because if I don't go now, I don't know how much longer my health or my fitness is going to hold out, you know. And so I decided to quit my job and to go on the trail, both as a midlife adventure and also to, you know, the decision-making process, and often the creative process, is you get lots and lots and lots and lots of information, and then you need a period to just let it sit, and then the answer precipitates out. So I had done all this research about a career change and things that might be interesting, but I hadn't landed on anything exactly yet. So I thought, well, while I'm on this walk, I'll just mull this over and see what happens. So so that's the main reason I went. And then I wanted to have this adventure and to be outdoors and hike with my oldest friend too, my best friend.
For me, it really started when I was in 8th grade. Growing up just outside of Shenandoah National Park in Madison County, we used to go bear hunting in the mountains in the wintertime, right outside the park. And my dad and I drove our Jeep one time up a fire road up through the Rapidan Wildlife Management Area, and we ended up at the top of Fork Mountain, right at the boundary with the park. We got out and checked out one of the trails, and there was one of those concrete pillars that Shenandoah National Park uses with the metal bands that direct you to trail intersections. And it said Appalachian Trail, 8 miles, and it pointed this way. So that was really my first awareness that there was something called the Appalachian Trail. And I kind of just filed that away for a long time, for decades. But then living in Northern Virginia, I was a scoutmaster, and our family was very active with hiking and paddling and camping. And so our son Tracy and I had talked about the trail and getting out and going hiking on the Appalachian Trail. And we'd been out on the AT with Boy Scouts for 50 milers before, but never anything more, bigger than that. And so I got the 2008 hiker guide, and that was my first time when I really started studying that and analyzing what would it take to do a through hike. That was 2008. And in 2009, when Tracy was a freshman in college, he said, "Dad, I'm going to take some time off when I graduate, and I'm going to hike the trail. Will you come with me?" Now, no father can turn that down when your child asks you to take an adventure like that with them. I can't say no. So from that point in 2009, I knew exactly when we were going to start in 2012. And so a week after Tracy graduated from the College of William and Mary, we were in Maine. Lisa drove up there. The three of us summited Mount Katahdin, and off we went. But it was really Tracy that put the timing to it of when it would actually happen. Because until then, it was one of those dreams. I knew that I would do that at some point, but I didn't have a definite plan.
Now the question is, did you realize the purpose of your hike? Because I know it was a dream for both of you. Then you had other things happen that kind of was the impetus to get there. So did it live up to the dream that you originally had maybe as children?
Absolutely, yes, absolutely, absolutely did. And then while I was on the trail, I also continued thinking about this career change and all these, aptitude tests I'd taken and everything, and all this information I had gathered. And I did decide what to do. And after that, prior to the trail, I never worked anywhere for more than 4 years. And I tended to change careers every time I went to a new job. And so when I got off the trail, I became a consultant, an independent consultant for environmental organizations, mainly in grant writing, fundraising and organizational development. And I did that for 20 years. So it really was a good decision. And I really enjoyed that work, and just retired in July last year.
Yep. Yeah. Tracy and I hiked together from Mount Katahdin to Harpers Ferry, and then he went off to graduate school. And spending almost 3 months together on the trail just transformed our relationship. From father and son, we just became equal partners. And I was able to see him as a peer, not as my son. So it was really a wonderful experience for the two of us to spend time together. And then it was a more difficult challenge when I was hiking alone from Harpers Ferry to Springer, just because of the dynamics of being totally on my own. The trail is for the most part less challenging in the southern half, but there's more of a mental stress to it when you're on your own. Fortunately, I like to be by myself. I don't mind that, but it was something that gave me more pause and more cause for reflection. And somewhere along the line, as we were hiking, I started thinking about hostels and our interaction and experience with hostel keepers, and wanting to stay connected with the trail community and wanting to be able to give back. And so I started thinking through what it would take to operate a hostel somewhere on the AT. You have a lot of time at night to think when you're hiking, because there's no television out there, very few distractions. It gets dark early and you're tired. So lots of time to lay there and think. And I had everything all figured out of what the hostel would look like, how it would run. I talked to some hostel keepers in the southern part, down in Tennessee and North Carolina, to pick their brains. And I was looking for property as I was hiking through Northern Virginia, and Lisa picked me up on a couple of weekends, and together we were looking for a place in the Northern Virginia area, until we ultimately found Mountain Home, and it's nothing like what I imagined while I was hiking.
So for you, the dream didn't actually come true. Well, in a way, it did.
It did. It did. It was just different.
Just different. Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. So you both mentioned you took a lot of time on your thru hikes to really think and reflect, and it impacted both of your careers, obviously. Sonia ended up in a 20-year career as a consultant in writing, grant writing, fundraising, and organizational development. And Scott and Lisa embarked on a whole other new career as hostel owners. Are there maybe one or two other lessons from the thru hike that maybe you learned that maybe you'd like to share? I mean, our guests last month, excuse me, were so fresh off the trail that they hadn't unpacked all of that stuff yet. But it's been a while for you guys. I'm just wondering if there's one or two other lessons maybe that
Yeah.
you
Yeah,
came away
what,
with.
what I observed during my through hike and since is that the trail community is a very positive, supportive community. When you're hiking, people you've never seen before are really interested in what you're doing. For some of them, they're fascinated that you're hiking 2,000 miles. They may not have even known that that was a possibility because they've never heard of the Appalachian Trail before. But people really take an interest in what you're doing, and they're really supportive. They go out of their way to find things to do to help you. I was offered a pair of boots out of the back of somebody's car. We're given rides. Trail angels would leave water caches at road crossings. And people will stop and say, is there anything I can do to help you? Do you need anything? You don't get that very often in most aspects of our modern lives. But within the trail community, that's a strong tradition. And it helps each of us that experiences that to bring it home and then to incorporate that into the rest of our lives and share that with everybody else, whether they're hiking or not. So I think that's one of the most important takeaways I got, was to always look for ways to give back and to be supportive of other people, whether I know them or not, whether they are doing the same things that I'm doing or not, but not to judge people by their looks and to look for ways to help them.
Yeah, I would agree with that wholeheartedly. The ethos along the trail of both hikers and communities and people who live along the trail is very high. The integrity is very high. And I know we met people who didn't even hike, but had moved from, say, California, someplace really far away, just to live near the Appalachian Trail, even though, because they had heard about this ethos, this community. So even though they weren't hikers and they weren't interested in being through hikers, they wanted to be part of that. So that was a very impressive. And I tend to think of the trail as a 51st state. It has its own government, its own culture, its own population, its own ethos. But the things that I learned were neither my hiking partner, Amy, nor I are athletes. Neither of us would ever, in fact, Amy hates to sweat. And unlike Scott, we were from Flat, Illinois. We had never climbed up a hill with a backpack. I had been backpacking 2 nights in my life, and Amy had never been backpacking. And although I was very comfortable in the woods, I did grow up in the woods. I was not a distance, and I car camped, but we had no experience. But by the end, I think both Amy and I could and do say with confidence, we are athletes. Because one of the reasons I wasn't an athlete was I've never been terribly coordinated at sports, but I always thought, well, at least I can walk. I mean, right? So that's all it takes, is putting one foot in front of the other and being determined that you're going to do it, So another thing I learned, I have 2 other things that I learned. One other thing was, if you walk, you can go anywhere. You think, oh, I have a car, I can go anywhere in my car. You can go far more places by foot than you can on a bicycle or on a car. And so I walk whenever I can. I walk all over Front Royal, and it's always interesting and always different. And when I even visit a city now, it's almost like a hiking trip. I don't just jump on in a cab or an Uber or or hop on a metro or something, you know, I start walking and I pack for the day the same way I would if I were hiking. I bring an umbrella, I bring some water, I bring a snack, you know, all that stuff that I bring when I'm hiking. And yes, I do hike with an umbrella. And then the third thing I learned on the trail was I don't need anything. You know, it was such a high out there hiking and so beautiful. And I felt like I don't need to do anything else really in my life. The rest of it is just gravy, but you really funnel into being where you are in the moment at that point. And you don't, you know, even though, yes, I thought out a new career and I thought of a book and all that, I really felt like I had everything I needed. And I was so at peace, you know, the whole way.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. It's interesting. I think that you've all both had time to really think about the impact of the thru hike and what you learned personally about yourselves and what you needed or didn't need. And I think those lessons do take a while to unpack, to really see how it plays out through life and how it changes your behaviors or perspectives. One of the things I wanted to touch on, because both of you thru hiked the Appalachian Trail and decided to move here to this trail community of Front Royal. So I was wondering if you could just share a little bit when you first came upon this little town and what you thought of it. Like, was there something about it that was particularly impressive, or what, you know, what made you think about this being a potential home? Other than, Scott, you've already alluded to, you were looking for properties in Northern Virginia for a hostel. So maybe we'll start with you and Lisa about what was it? Was it the property itself? Was it the town, the area, combination of things?
Yeah, we looked at various different sites in Fauquier, Clark, Warren, and Rappahannock counties, and nothing was quite working for us in terms of location, proximity to the trail, and the buildings until we stumbled across Mountain Home, which is on Route 522, 3.5 miles outside of. And at the time that we found it, I was still hiking on the trail in 2012. Mountain Home was abandoned. It was in the National Register of Historic Places, but had been abandoned for about 10 years and was an overgrown collection of derelict buildings. There were people who had lived across the road for 20 years that didn't even know the buildings existed. That's how covered over they were with vegetation. But when we found it and came out here, I looked at it and realized the location. I just said, it's perfect. And you know, your attitude when you're thru hiking is, you know, somebody could hand you a muddy glass of water and you'd say, oh, that's delicious and wonderful. So I looked at it and said, it's perfect. And Lisa kind of looked at me and said, I'm not so sure about this.
And it was such a wreck. It was a total wreck. It's amazing what they did with it.
You'll see a few pictures if we get to them at the end. In fact, I thought it was going to be so much work that I looked for many other, you know, I looked through the other real estate that was available at the time that was close enough to the trail, and really there wasn't much that was close. Yeah, we looked at a few more, but they weren't really close enough. And it's funny that hikers, although they'll hike 2,000 miles, they don't really want to hike more than a mile to get to their place they're going to sleep. So it worked out okay. And then we got, well, the whole process of figuring out whether we're going to buy the house was one thing, but that's not really your question. Go ahead.
Yeah, so it wasn't so much Front Royal that we were attracted to. It was the specific property of Mountain Home that was intriguing to us and was just right. And then once we made the commitment to Mountain Home, then we started exploring Front Royal, getting to know the town, getting to know Warren County, getting to know the other hiking trails in the area and the northern part of Shenandoah National Park. Because of course I grew up on the eastern slope of the mountains, 50 miles south. I'm very familiar with the central section of the park, but I hadn't spent a lot of time up here.
And some of the positive people that we encountered, the zoning department, for instance, was very helpful. Karen and Matt and other folks there. Also the visitor center was just very, very helpful, very welcoming.
And George McIntyre, who runs the Apple House over in Linden, is a very community-minded businessman. And he kind of took us under his wing, and he helped us to get acclimated and introduced us to some folks, and really served as our first supporter in the community. And so I want to always remember George very fondly for the help and the support that he gave us. He's a very strong advocate for the AT, but he also took the time to listen to what we were trying to do and went out of his way to help us.
Well, the way I ended up in front row was kind of funny. As I mentioned, we started in Harpers Ferry, West Virginia. So we were hiking south. It was very early in the season, so there weren't leaves on the trees yet or anything. It was we started April 5th, and especially at the heights, there was nothing. It was like winter still. So Front Royal was our first town stop. We were still kind of new, so we'd been on the trail maybe a week and a half or 2 weeks, and we hitchhiked into town, and we didn't even know there was a downtown. We were just out there next to the mall, the Martin's Mall, the strip mall, and the Super 8 or what, all that stuff. And for some reason, I looked around, and because it was our first town stop, I thought, and all around it, even though you're there at the grocery store, there still are hills. You can see all the hills and the woods. And we stayed overnight in one of the motels out there, the Scottish Inn or something. And for some reason, I looked around, and you have to remember I was from Illinois, and I just looked around and I thought, I could probably live here if I had to. And then as we hiked south, and we went through many small towns of all different kinds, and some we walked right through their downtowns. And for some reason, I never thought that again. And so when we finished with the trail, my husband decided to go back to school at University of Maryland. And once he finished school, he got a job in Manassas. And so guess what? We ended up living in Front Royal, this place that I had thought, I guess I could live here. So that's how I ended up here. But I do feel committed after through hiking to always live close to the Appalachian Trail. That's a very important thing to me. So even if we left Virginia, we would live near the trail.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting, particularly Scott, when you mentioned the community here, that once you committed to Mountain Home and started looking around, that you experienced what it's like to be in a trail community and how welcoming and how helpful everybody was. Mm-hmm. They saw your vision for this hostel, which we definitely needed one here in Front Royal, and you met that need very well and took a property, because I remember that property and what a wreck it was. And I remember meeting you at one of our Appalachian Trail Community Committee meetings, and you came in and introduced yourself and your plan, and you had 5 phases, and I remember being just being so impressed with the scope and how many phases there were, but then watching each phase progress. And now there's just this beautiful property right there by the Appalachian Trail, and grateful that you allow us to hold events there, and so we get to experience the beauty of it. And also, Sonia, you mentioned you're in town and you're looking up and you see the hills, and that's the one thing that I think drew me to the town as well, is all of this beautiful natural beauty, right? All these natural assets in town and surrounding us. And yeah, you look around and you can feel that that beauty. The trail is right there. And if you have that relationship with the trail, like a lot of hikers do, you're called to it all the time. Like, you're called to go back to it. And it's so great to just be able to walk out our door and be on the trail.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yep.
Awesome. So let's talk a little bit about, let's see. Sonia, did you like to share a little bit about, you mentioned writing a book, and I know it's a bit of a dark comedy about your experiences. Would you like to share a little bit?
Yeah, sure. When my career, before I went on the trail, I was the executive director of one of the country's largest writers retreats. So, and I had always thought, you know, if I got to my deathbed and I hadn't written a novel in my life, I didn't really care about getting it published or anything, but if I hadn't written a novel, I've always been a voracious reader. I thought, you know, I'd wonder, like, well, what were you doing? You know, really? Couldn't you do that? So I thought, oh, well, I will, when I go on the trail, I'll write a midlife memoir, you know, of our hike on the trail, Amy and I together. And so I thought about that, but very quickly I realized that, first of all, a really good midlife memoir came out while we were on the trail. And I read it and I thought, well, this thing's great. I don't really have anything to add to this. And then I also realized there are a gazillion memoirs on the trail, and who needs to really hear about me climbing up Old Spec and me going down Old Spec? And, you know, so I started to think about writing a novel instead. And it seems that the trail it's uniquely American in a way that Americans take on kind of absurd, huge absurd epic projects, you know, like Hoover Dam or, you know, and I just thought, and then there's the metaphor of a trail as a life, you know, you travel in life, you travel a trail, a journey of many kinds. And I really started to get interested in my relationship with my friend Amy. And we have been friends ever since 7th grade. So we've been friends for, I think, 35 years or something at that point, and knew each other well. But the trail can be a real pressure cooker. And then there are just so many funny and absurd things that happen along the trail. Plus, as Scott said, people are so enthralled with what you're doing. And I remember some people calling us when they'd ask what we were doing. We were hiking the trail 2,200 miles long, you know, do it in 6 or 8 months or whatever. They would say, well, you're heroes. And I think, I don't really know why we're heroes. I mean, we're just doing this crazy thing. It's not like we're doing it for the good of humanity or anything. So I thought about this novel about these two women at midlife who would be hiking this long trail, and about the things that they would be dealing with, and the things that the people they would encounter, and the things that would change for them in their lives. And that for them, this walk, and I made up a fictitious trail, would be you know, a metaphor for their lives and for change and for reflecting on their own friendship, for better or for worse. They were sort of frenemies, really, and then changes that they would make as a result. The things that were the disappointments in their lives, as well as the triumphs and that sort of thing. So when I got done, I really had this entire story. I mean, I would think about it, you know, think as I walked along, think about the characters and what would happen and where they would go, and you know, all of that.
Wow. So you decided on a career change, you found a new place to live, and you wrote a novel.
Right.
All while you were through hiking.
And stayed friends with my best friend.
Stayed friends. Okay, now that's even more. That's even
That was the
more
biggest
impressive. Oh goodness.
Susan, you know, there's a backdrop to all of this. You know, Sonia's husband David, you know, wasn't hiking with her, and Lisa put her foot on the trail in each of the 14 states, but wasn't through hiking. And you know, you need that support at home in order to be able to step away and to do something like this on the trail. So I just want to give a quick shout out to spouses or partners that enable others of us to do what we've done.
Yeah, and maybe we want to talk about that a little bit, because it does take a support system But when you made that decision, I guess one of the questions I would have for Lisa is what was that like for you, having both your husband and your son take off on this grand adventure, and you were their primary support person? And
Right.
so what did that entail for you?
Well, somebody had to pay the bills. Someone had to keep working, and they did need shuttles to Katahdin and from Springer, and various places in between. I also sent packages to them of food for resupply. Granted, you know, they can pick up a lot of food along the way in the various towns, but Scott had it set out so that I would be resupplying him with boxes of things that he might not be able to find on the trail. So that worked out nicely. Someone had to take care of the dog. We had a dog at the time. So there's a lot of things that need to be taken care of at home. I have heard of people selling everything they own, selling their house, selling their car to do the trail. We weren't in a position to do that.
Right.
So it worked out well. I'm like Scott, I don't mind being on my own. So I enjoyed that alone time too. And work kept me plenty busy. It was a full-time job. And I missed him a lot. And I missed Tracy. But he'd been at college for 4 years, so I was kind of used to that. But I also was able to get out and hike. So that was good too.
Yeah, because Scott mentioned you actually put your foot on the trail in each of the 14 states that the trail runs through. And was that, so when you would meet them at different trailheads, did you hike in with them or just hike for a ways with them? Or was that part of the plan?
Different things. I did hike Katahdin with them. And I hiked Jefferson, is it? Yeah, we decided to do a day hike and hike Jefferson. And usually we would agree on a place to meet. Of course, they usually arrived several hours before I did. I was usually driving hours and hours to get there. In fact, it was interesting on the way back one time, I was coming back from somewhere in New England, and I had stayed the night at a hotel, and then I got up the next morning, and I realized that the highway was going under the Appalachian Trail, and I thought, oh, good, I can put my foot on the trail in New York. So I got off the trail, got off the road, sorry, and got on my boots and started hiking and encountered 2 thru-hikers. And I said, oh, are you thru-hikers? And yes, they were, and they were preparing their breakfast. And I said, well, which direction are you headed? And they said, north. And I said, oh, great. Well, somewhere along the line, you will meet these 2 people. And I described Scott, possible. And I described Tracy Chanticleer. And sure enough, somewhere in Massachusetts, I think it was.
We were walking through a town in Massachusetts, and there was a collection of northbound hikers lounging in a front yard of a Trail Angel's house.
Can't hear.
And as we're hiking through this town in Massachusetts, all of a sudden, somebody from the porch over there calls out, "Hey, Possible! Hey, Chanticleer!" And we were southbounders. We didn't know anybody who was going north. We didn't, we would pass people, but we didn't really know anybody. So for somebody to be able to recognize us and know our name was incredible. I said, well, how do you know who we are? We've never met you before. And that's when they told us the story of running into Lisa up on top of Bear Mountain in New York.
I always felt, whenever I got on the trail, I felt closer to Scott and Tracy because there's that connection. There's one trail. And, whether you're going north or south, everyone's going to cover the same territory. And so I felt closer that way. It's cool.
And you were sharing in the adventure with them.
Yes, in that way.
Yeah, awesome. Excellent. Why don't we switch gears a little bit? I'd like to talk a little bit, since you both thru-hiked in a while ago, particularly Sonia, you thru-hiked in 2000. Can we talk a little bit about what changes you've seen in thru-hikers, or just in how people thru-hike? Like, what are some of the changes? I know, Sonia, you mentioned something really interesting that I think we all take for granted these days, but wasn't available in the year 2000.
There are a couple of things really, and Scott and Lisa will have a much better, bead on what's different since they're dealing with hikers all the time. But for one thing, hiking in 2000, if you all will think back, there were cell phones, but they were not in great use. There were flip phones, and some people had them, but lots of people didn't. And you certainly couldn't, no one had them on the trail. And even if you had them, there would have been zero reception. I mean, in fact, I don't even remember how it worked back then, even if you just moved, I was from Chicago. So if you went out of Chicago, I don't even know if your cell phone then would work, in some other state or whatever, some other phone system. So there were no cell phones. And that was the year of the Gore-Bush election. So I remember, the night of the election night, and the next day we were trying to find out who won. And of course, as we all know now, no one had won. They didn't have a winner for several weeks. And so we're asking people along the trail who won, and nobody knew. And, finally we hear from someone who said, nobody knows. It didn't, and we were just like, what? So there were no cell phones. So that was really something that's really changed a lot. And another thing that has really changed is we were probably the last year before the real movement toward go light. Most of the equipment that we had, although we really pared it down and really were traveling pretty light. For example, my backpack alone weighed like 6 pounds, which right now, that's a very heavy backpack these days. Although it had that wonderful Osprey suspension, so it was not a problem. But now hikers hike with such light gear and such, there were no no hammocks, nothing like that. So that's the other really big change that has happened.
Yeah, even in 2012, I carried a cell phone with me, but it was turned off and stowed in my pack. And about once a week, I would get to the top of a mountain and see if I could get just enough signal to send an email out. Coverage was very poor, but what we see now is everybody's plugged in. They have apps like GutHook that they use that are tied into GPS navigation. None of that existed until just a few years ago, but it's very widespread now. And so the introduction of newer technologies has really changed how people hike, and it's enabled more people to get out and experience the trail also. There are a lot more people hiking now than before. Even last year in 2020 with COVID, we saw a lot of people out, not necessarily through hiking, but escaping for weekends or week-long sections just to get outdoors and escape the quarantines at home, which is a really good thing. It's great to see so many people out in the woods and exploring. It's introduced other concerns and other pressures for overcrowding and for trail maintenance, and it's also opened up more opportunities for people like us to open hostels on the trail. There's a new hostel that is opening this year in Warren County, Stumble Inn. And we were over meeting with David and Danielle earlier this week, and we're just thrilled to have another hostel open in our community to support hikers, because it's definitely needed. Yeah, I think technology is a big change, and then just the sheer volume has introduced other challenges that we didn't face, a few years ago.
And I think people are adjusting by starting their trail hike at different locations. Sonia mentioned that she did what's called a flip-flop, essentially, where you start in the center and then, go north and come south again. And people are starting in all different places along the trail now. And that helps relieve the pressure from starting at Georgia, at Springer Mountain, and having, 50 people at a tent site at a time, campground at a time.
Yeah, which is that is exactly what we wanted to avoid. And that is the reason that we went, one of the main reasons that we went the way that we did, which is actually called a wraparound.
Oh, okay.
So we went south and then we went south again, and the other reason was my husband and I had visited the visitor center for the Appalachian Trail at their headquarters in Harpers Ferry, where there is a scale model of the trail. And he pointed out that the lowest, easiest part looked like it was in the middle around Harpers Ferry. And since we were coming from Illinois, where we never climbed anything more than 300 feet, we thought that was a good place to start because we could really get our trail legs. Although I must say that Amy and I, even after, 1,000 miles, we still had an inside joke going, when am I going to get my trail legs? When am I going to get my trail legs? You have our trail legs yet?
Oh, that's funny. How did you, I just have I'm sure some of our audience may want to know, how did you fund these hikes? Because both of you did them at different times in your lives. Scott, Lisa mentioned that she was still working.
Yep.
And Sonia, you mentioned your husband, but for a partner to take off on this grand adventure for 6 months does may impact, finances at home. So is this something that once you made the decision you had to plan for and budget for and that sort of thing?
Dave and I were not married then.
Oh,
And,
okay.
and while I was on the trail, he started school in Maryland, at University of Maryland. And both Amy and I quit our jobs, and both of our jobs offered us, they offered us, a sabbatical. I didn't take mine because I knew I'd be moving wherever Dave was going to end up going to school. And Amy's employer even continued her insurance, her health insurance, while she was on the trail, which was really generous. So, and one of the reasons that I wanted to go with Amy, and I knew she would go, is that throughout our lives, I've been able to call Amy and say, Amy, I found this really cool island, quit your job. And she goes, okay. And she does. And, we've just had very inexpensive adventures, all over the world together. And sometimes, found jobs wherever we're going. So, yeah, we both had saved some money, and she was going back to her job. But it was not an expensive endeavor. Probably the most expensive thing for us was that we didn't have any equipment, since we had never really gone backpacking before. So we did have to spend some money on that. But I can't even remember now how much it was, because it was so long ago, and it would be in 2000, whatever the dollar was worth back then. I'm sure it's different than it is now. But so we just decided to go. And Amy's not married, and she doesn't have children, and her mother actually was our support. And so we had, Amy's childhood bedroom was just filled with boxes, that we would call and tell her, okay, send this one, send that one. Oops, no, send it over there. Oops, no, not there. And then the other thing was that when you go hiking at midlife, your friends are working, and they have jobs, and they have disposable income if they're lucky, and if you're lucky. So every time we would end up at a post office, we had told everyone where we were going to be stopping along the way and everything. I am not kidding. We would have between 7 and 15 care packages.
Wow.
Yeah. And people would send us, we were getting, dark chocolate and smoked salmon, and, everybody wanted to be part of the adventure.
Sorry, honey.
Just by not that the same person would be sending us these wonderful things every time, but it seemed like so many people wanted to be part of the adventure. And so they would, we would get a single care package from someone and it would have just these wonderful, thoughtful things in it, but we'd have to go to the post office and, we'd be schlepping these boxes back to our hostel or whatever, emptying our backpacks and loading them up with these boxes or ripping them open at the post office and trying to consolidate, and the postal, so you get to really love the postal service when you're on the trail. They are so great. And they would say, oh, finally, you're here. We have all these boxes for you. So that's one of the good things about going when you're older is, your friends want to do things like that.
Yeah. And for me, it was possible because, Lisa and I have both always worked and we've also always lived frugally off one salary. Mm-hmm. We always lived as if we only had one income. And so we had the disposable income, and I took a 6-month leave of absence from my job at Ericsson, and they were very gracious about allowing me to take time away. They didn't finally approve it until 1 week before I left, but I was going. I'd made it very clear I was going either way.
Right.
Come back, and so they enabled that to happen. So I knew I had a job to go back to. But the funny thing is, Sonia, like you said, in mid-career, in midlife, there aren't many people who can do that, who step away. And I ran into a woman up in Maine who kind of sized me up, and she said, "Oh, well, you're obviously unemployed if you're out here." And I said, "No, actually, I have a very good job. I took a leave of absence to do this with my son," and she just could not envision that. She didn't believe me. You must not be telling the truth. You must not have a job. But I did. I was very glad I could go back.
Was it, and back when I went in 2000, the saying used to be that you could hike it for $1 a mile. And that was true. You could hike the whole trail on $2,200. I mean, your quality of life might not be that great, but you could do it. And so I don't know I doubt they still say that. I don't know what the saying is now, but so it was not a very costly endeavor. And there were so many great hostels and very, very affordable. So that was another good reason to go back then. I have no idea how much it would be now.
Yeah, I think a lot of it is dictated on, do you have to purchase gear? And even the range of prices for gear these days, it's a wide range. It depends on how much money you actually want to invest. I think the more ultralight you go, the more expensive it gets. And then, of course, how are you going? Are you going to stay more in shelters on the trail? Are you going to stay off in town more frequently? So I guess you can really do it on the cheap or spend a lot more. I do see sometimes they say average at least you can still average about $1 to $2 a mile. Like you could do it that cheaply. Good. That's what I see a lot.
Yeah, but you hear the saying, hike your own hike. And there are people out there who will hike the trail and they want to be under a roof every night. They want, and not just a shelter, but they want to have a place that has electricity and heat or air conditioning every night. And so they plan their hike and they do things with shuttles and slack packing and go from hostel to hostel or motel or hotel. And then there are other people who can't afford to do that. And they're out hiking and they're staying in the woods almost every night. And then there are others that like to experience every trail community along the way. They make a point of stopping at every trail community because they want to get that experience with different people in different areas. And so you see a lot of different approaches to how to hike. And so the cost can be very different for people. The trail is a great equalizer that, my gear may be brand new and it may be lighter than Sonia's, but we're all hiking the same trail and we're all mindful of supporting each other and encouraging each other. So the differences don't really matter.
And that was going to be one of the last questions I asked. Why don't I ask it now? Because you spent all these years as hikers, supporting the hiking community. Scott, you provide this hostel. Sonia, you've worked for the Appalachian Trail Conservancy as well in your work. And so tell us, what are hikers really like?
Oh gosh, there's such a huge variety of people. I have a picture of, we were up in Maine and at a hostel where as part of staying at the hostel, everyone had a gallon of ice cream. And so we were staying up there, and I have a picture of all of us, and there were probably 16, 15 people in the picture. And there's a woman who's over 60. There's a man who I think he was close to like 75. And these were all through hikers. So it's a huge, and then there were, really young people as well, like people who were just out of high school. So it's a huge variety of people, and people come from other countries to do this. The Appalachian Trail is known as the Everest of long trails, distance trails. And one thing I will say about hikers in general is that they really look out for each other. And like I said, there's a very, very high ethical standard. So even if you see somebody who looks all scraggly and, a big beard and, looks all dirty and maybe even smells really bad, chances are, that's a really fine person. Dave and I once, my husband and I, were just day hiking in the Shenandoah National Park on a very crowded weekend, like Labor Day or Memorial Day or something. And when we got back from our 8-mile hike, the parking lot was absolutely jammed. In fact, we hadn't even been able to park in a parking space. We had to pull right up next to the trail and park the car there. And when we got back, so we were gone like 4 or 5 hours, on top of the white car was Dave's dark brown wallet. And it had been sitting there for 5 hours in a crowded parking lot with many, many people coming and going, perfectly visible, and no one touched it. That is how I think of the hiking community.
Yeah.
Not that there aren't bad apples. I mean, of course, but in general, that's the hiking community that I know.
Yeah. If I had to boil it down to one word, I would just describe hikers as generous.
Yes, really generous.
Generous in offering what they have to share, whether it's food, water, information, encouragement, whatever it is they have to share. Hikers look to do that.
Yep.
I'd like to share that we've had a wide variety of hikers stay with us. So, and they come from all walks of life. We've had lawyers and doctors and nurses and welders and poets, so all kinds of kind of jobs and non-jobs. I mean, basically, you've got a lot of kids out of college who are trying to figure out what they want to do next, or you have people between jobs or between marriages or whatever. You've got all kinds of folks hiking the trail. And I have learned, as Scott mentioned earlier in this session, that you really can't judge people by what they look like. Because as he's mentioned, they'll come in, the guys have got big beards, and folks may have, shaved half their hair off or whatever. But they are wonderful folks, and you just have to go beyond that. In fact, most of us would smell a little funny if we had been hiking for 2 weeks in the summer without a shower. So it's just a normal human thing.
Smell funny after 2 days without a shower. Hiking in the Shenandoah National Park. Hello.
So you can't judge a book by its cover at all when on the trail. Yeah.
I'll never forget, we were, Amy and I were down in the Smokies, and I think we'd just been in town or something, so we had a shower or whatever. And we were doing there were a whole bunch of, hairpin switchbacks. And as this couple passed us, they didn't know we could hear them, but they were on the next switchback above us. And she was saying to him, "Now they smell pretty good for backpackers."
Great. All right, I'm
And they
going,
are of all ages as well.
Yeah.
I
Yes,
mean, they're
all
the young and the retirees, and we've had guys, what were they, 80 or so?
Mhm.
Yeah, they were
Yeah.
hiking, and they were hiking kind of in the winter time.
Our year, there was an entire family. They were called the Family from the North. That was their trail name. And they had decided to move house. They had a baby. I mean, a baby. And kids, they had about 5 children, from maybe 12 down. And they hiked the entire thing, and they were moving to, South Carolina or something. So they decided to walk it. And and they made it the whole way. So yeah, one guy our year was hiking with a tuba. Did the whole thing with a tuba. We had 2 sisters who hiked barefoot.
I heard about them.
We had another guy who had made all his gear out of Tyvek. And he was called Tyvek Man. And Tyvek is the insulation they use for building. Sometimes you see Tyvek all over the side of a bridge. So whenever all over a house that's under construction. So all kinds of people out there.
Yep.
And they all love the trail. It brings us all together. So I want to invite our participants, if you have any questions, to put them here in the chat box. And while you do that, we're going to share a few photos from the adventures of our guests tonight. We're starting here with Sonia and Amy.
So there we are in the beginning in Harpers Ferry. Boy, that backpack of mine, it looks so big, but it sure got smaller fast. There we are in the White Mountains in New Hampshire.
Now, was this when you had already hiked south and you had come around, right?
Yeah, we had already, it took us 8 months to do the whole trail because we didn't consider that I'm 5'10" and Amy is 5'2". So she was, my average mile was half an hour and hers was about 42 minutes, I think. So every day I waited for her for 2 hours in various places. And then when we turned 50, we walked across England with my husband, Dave. So that's, I can't remember, about 150 miles on the coast to coast trail. So as you can tell, Amy and I get along extremely well.
We had a lot of fun. And here's another adventure.
Yes, Dave and I went to, my family comes, my father's side of the family comes from Sweden, and we went to a family reunion in Sweden, and then we hiked about 100 miles on the Kungsleden, which is the King's Trail, which we saw reindeer. It goes all the way up into the Arctic Circle. And we had this beautiful, beautiful trail. It was midnight sun, it never got dark all night long. So you could just hike and hike and hike.
Wow, that's amazing. It's wonderful to see how, and I always like to say, well, your hiking adventures spark others, but you seem to have this very adventurous spirit since you were a child. So it seems like that's just a part of your life, but these are wonderful. And then we have a few photos of Mountain Home here. This is Scott and Lisa's latest adventure. And this is the finished piece, right, Scott? Go ahead.
Yeah, that's our son Tracy on the left with the big long beard. He's had a beard since he was 15, but this is a picture of what the main house looks like now. And it didn't look that way when we first found it in 2012. But we have the main house and we also have the cabin, which operate together. The cabin more like a hostel and the main house more like a traditional bed and breakfast.
And here's a view of the side view, so you can kind of see the expanse of the original building there, and the lovely porch patio area that you put in.
Yep, the patio in the back is a wonderful addition. Yes.
Now I know that let's see if we have I'm going to stop sharing here. I know that Lisa has some other photos that she would like to share. Do we have any? So we do have a question. and they wanted to know what was the biggest adversity you faced on the trail and how you solved it. So if one of you would like to share something like that as we look at some of these wonderful photos of Mountain Home and Scott's adventure.
Adversity, I would say we took very good care of ourselves. We never allowed ourselves to get blisters, for example. We ate well. We didn't take risks. We tried to stay dry. We were not careless, and so we didn't face a lot of adversity that way. I would say that our friendship bore some strain. Oh, there you see what they were dealing with. That was the before picture, right?
Yes.
But adversity, we ran into one person that we knew immediately was dangerous and got out of there. Just spider sense went off even after 1,500 miles of being out there with all these wonderful, nice people. We just knew right away there's something wrong with this person. Got to get out of here. So adversity, the trail took us longer than we thought. We thought it would take us 6.5 months, but it took us 8. We didn't really have, poison ivy. Amy got boils at one point, which was very painful. But we didn't have a lot of adversity. We didn't, I think because we were careful, we were really careful and just never let anything get out of hand,
Mm-hmm. Yep. I would say the biggest adversity that we faced was up in Maine. There was a lot of water in Maine. We hiked early season. We started May 21st that year. There'd been very little snow, but still a lot of water. And I learned the hard way that you need to know your topography and you need to pay attention to what's happening. We were hiking through the Carry Ponds region, which is a low-lying area of Maine. The ponds are called Carry Ponds because they're all interconnected by streams. And back in the logging days, they would float logs from pond to pond, and they would use the ponds to hold the logs. We got to a shelter in that area at 7 p.m. just as the heavens burst, and we jumped into the shelter and were dry. And it rained all night long. The next morning, it was still pouring down rain, so we stayed in the shelter waiting for it to stop raining. And it rained all day long, so we stayed in the shelter all day and took a 0 and spent a second night in that shelter. And it finally stopped raining about 11 o'clock on the third day. And so then we started to move. And that's when we very quickly discovered our mistake because the trail was under 4 feet of water.
Wow.
The entire region was flooded. And we had to wade out 8 miles through a flood zone to get to high ground. And we crossed the Carabasset River was at flood stage. And what should have been a 20-second wading through ankle deep water was going through a torrent that was almost waist deep, knowing that if you slipped and fell, you'd be washed downstream to a few hundred yards before you could even catch your breath. So it's very dangerous. So I learned that even in bad weather and adverse conditions, it's best to keep moving rather than have this false sense of security by staying put.
I think that's well said. We had, 1.5 foot of snow in August up in Maine, up in the Highlands. And, we're in our shorts and the wind was blowing so hard, it was nearly, our backpacks were acting like sails and it was very hard to stay on the trail. And so, you can run into some rough weather and, but you get seasoned and you get to know what you can handle and what you can't. And
having that partner with you gives you a lot of strength though.
Yes.
That's what I found.
Yes,
Yeah.
I think that's right. Even though Amy and I were almost never hiking together because our pace was so different. But I would wait for her at lunch. We would have lunch together, and then I would wait for her in the evening, pick our campsite or wherever we were going to end up. Or if there was some really beautiful overlook that we wanted to share, we might stop and wait there. But otherwise, we were hiking separately. But to see each other at the end of the day was really, very, very comforting.
Excellent. We have a question for Scott. Scott, Deb would like to know if it was hard to go back to the same job when you completed your thru hike.
Well, I didn't go back to the exact same job. We had spent a couple of months preparing to transition, for me to transition my management responsibilities to another management team. And so I'd been managing a large group of about 50 people and turned that over to a different manager and his supervisors to take over. So I knew that when I came back, I'd be doing something a little bit different. But I took a 6-month leave of absence, and I finished the trail in 4.5 months. I made better time than I thought I would. And then I took a couple of weeks to get reacclimated. And I was very fortunate when I went back to work that they weren't quite ready for me yet. They were still expecting me to come in December. And I showed up and said, hey, I'm ready to come back 1st of November. And so that gave me some buffer time. Even though I was back at work, I was able to do a couple special projects, do something a little different, and get reacclimated. But I had talked with my boss, who was a good friend of mine, and we're still good friends even now. And I had said, John, when I come back, I don't expect my same job. I'll be happy to do whatever you need me to do, because they had made such a commitment to allow me to go and take this leave that it wasn't going to bother me if I was doing something that wasn't exactly what I wanted at first when I came back. It was a way for me to give back to the company.
And one other question for both of you, and is that, did you do anything physically to train for your thru hike, or did you just, now Sonia, you kind of mentioned you chose a flat area and you were waiting to get your trail legs, but did you do anything back in Illinois? Any type of training?
I was a runner back then, so I had good endurance from that, and I did take my pack and load it up and go up to the Kettle Moraine, which may have had hills, which is in Wisconsin, which may have had hills of 500 feet, and walked with my pack on, going up and down those little moraines, relatively small moraines. And I did go on a 2-night backpack in the Shenandoah National Park with my cousin, who lives here in Virginia. And she is a hiker and cyclist. She and her husband cycled all the way across the country and back, and they hiked half the Appalachian Trail. So, and then I'm such a book person, I just read and read and read and read, and felt really that we were quite well prepared. And like I said, started out as easily as we could. Amy, like I said, she hates to sweat, but I knew she wouldn't quit. So, and she would ride her bike and at home and stuff, but she's just a trooper. I mean, we just took it slow, we just kept at it.
Yep. And similar to Sonia, I had a very detailed plan worked out. I had read a couple of books. The book that helped me the most was AWOL on the Appalachian Trail by David Miller. He wrote about mid-career life changes, and his descriptions of the trail were very real to life. He does not embellish it with the way that some authors will do. And so it's just very realistic. And David's book helped me a lot to understand what I was going to get into. As best you can until you experience it. It helps to be in good physical condition when you start, but it's really hard to train to do something like that, because you can be a runner, you can be a cyclist, you can be a swimmer, but the muscles that you're using are different when you're going up and down mountains than they are when you're running on a track or riding a bicycle. They're just totally different.
Yeah.
So we took the first month hiking through Maine to really get acclimated to the trail and to get our trail legs. We hiked 12 to 13 miles per day. And when we got to our target shelter, whether it was 2 o'clock in the afternoon or 5 o'clock in the afternoon, we stopped and just rested. And we did that for a month consciously. And then we gradually started to hike longer miles. And by the end, I was hiking 20 to 25 miles a day routinely. And if I got to my target shelter at 5 p.m. and I thought I still had another hour or two of daylight to squeeze out, I'd go another few miles and then pitch my tent. But I didn't start that way.
Right.
Yeah, and I mean, Amy and I were so cautious that even, of course we got stiff since we didn't, we were using muscles we hadn't used much in Illinois. So in like the second day, we got really, really stiff. We stopped for a day. We were, I think, at Bear's Den or one of those, or Blackburn, one of those 2 hostels on the trail. And we just took the day off. We really were just, we knew we were in it for the long haul. And we, like we ran into a young guy who was eating only power bars. You do stuff like that. You have to treat yourself well because the trail is very rough. And if you don't take care of yourself, it's going to get the better of you. You're not going to be able to do it. Yeah. So you've got to keep yourself in good shape.
And I think you made an important point earlier too, Sonia, that you were very careful not to get blisters. And that's probably the one piece of advice I give to all beginners is to take care of your feet.
Yeah.
Get professionally fitted, get the right boots or the right hiking shoes for you and for your feet. And take care of those feet. As soon as you feel a hot spot, stop, take those shoes off and address it. That's probably the one thing you read about or you hear about is problems with your feet. So taking care of yourself on the trail is an important thing. So we have a couple more questions. One is from Patrick. He wanted to know if you have a recommendation for beginners with young kids for trails. So we were wondering, Sonia?
Well, I have those 8 hikes for family hikes in the area. So is there a way that we can get those to them?
Yep.
Maybe Barbara could get an email or something and we could
yeah, well, so we will everybody who registered for the program will get an email tomorrow and we can include that in that email transmission. We'll just make sure we get that to Barbara. And also Scott, do you have a trail anything?
I think Shenandoah National Park has a tremendous trail system, over 500 miles of trails and a lot of variety and diversity within the park. And it also offers during 9 months out of the year, it offers the amenities of the waysides and the picnic areas and the campgrounds. So I think that for a family that's looking to experience hiking and being in the mountains for the first time, Shenandoah has a lot of support system there.
I would say go up to the visitor center, the Dickey Ridge Visitor Center, which is right there in the Northern District, and right across the street are a couple of really easy trails. There's the Fox Hollow Trail. It's about a mile long, and it goes by some old homestead locations there, sites, and then the Sneed Farm Loop as well is a great one because then you can go to where the old barn is, and so that's, and there's a section where there's a great view of the valley as well. So right there are 2 hikes that are great for kids. And I see they're in Stevens City, and there are quite a few parks and other places in the area, but we do have some resources that we'll send out to everybody so you can find your own trail and hike it.
There's also a gorgeous trail near Skyland, near the lodge, in the middle part of the park called the Limberlost Trail. That is a beautiful trail for people with disabilities. It's perfectly flat. It'd be a great one to take children on. It's it's a mile loop and it's beautiful. It's a beautiful trail.
And one last question has to do with your meals on the trail. Did you have a favorite meal? Did you dehydrate your own, or did you purchase Mountain House-like meals?
All of the above.
Yeah. I tend to carry maybe 2 or 3 Mountain House meals per week. So if I'm carrying 7 days worth of food, there are probably 2 or 3 of those nights where I'm going to have a really good meal. And then the others are things like North sides or ramen or tuna fish, less substantial.
And our,
Go ahead.
oh, and our son decided that he was going to try and dehydrate meals, and those were his favorite ones. The ones that he created himself and used our dehydrator to reduce the weight of them.
We very quickly realized one of the changes we made almost immediately, like on the 3rd day, was it doesn't make sense to eat a dinner at night. So we always ate dinner in the morning, and we usually had couscous with vegetable, like we could carry carrots and radishes, they stay fresh. And so we'd have carrot and then dried tomatoes and maybe raisins. I mean, so we always had couscous or a grain for breakfast and really ate well, and we cooked in the morning. And the last thing we wanted to do in the evening too was pull out a stove and start cooking. I mean, that does not sound fun. So we needed our calories in the morning, and we were willing to cook in the morning. So we got started a little later than most people, but we really, and then we would stop for a snack in the daytime, you know, so, and then we always met for lunch, and we'd have cheese and crackers and dried fruit. And believe me, when you're on the trail, Tang, it tastes so delicious. It's like the most wonderful thing. Like, can we have Tang today? You know, something that in everyday life, no way would I have some Tang. So, and food is so much more, it's just fuel, you know, like these fancy recipes I read about in Backpacker magazine and stuff, I just think, forget it. When you're going distance, you just want to pack the lightest food you can with the most calories you can get out of them. The fun thing is that you can eat anything you want. And in the fall, when it got cold, I was craving things like chocolate and caramel and, you know, sugar to build up some fat for the fall. And so, you know, I always had a lot of that in the autumn. And as soon as I got off the trail, that just all went, I wasn't interested in eating those things anymore at all. But in the evening, we would have powdered milk and Cheerios for dinner. That was it. So you just, you know, make it in a cup, and then we just, you know, have that, go to bed. And that way we could hike really late too, because we weren't worried about having to have a cook stove and wash things and all that. So that was we both felt that was a really good, worked really well for us.
Yeah. And for me, it was the exact opposite. The only time I would pull my stove out was at night, and it was usually just to boil water to rehydrate something. In the morning, we'd get up early with the sun and just stretch and hydrate and break camp and go. And then I'd hike about 2 hours and then stop and eat a Cliff Bar and a granola bar for breakfast, hike another 2 hours, and then have a little something, another 2 hours, and then stop for lunch and have maybe some trail mix and some tuna fish, and try to, throughout the day, refuel about every 2 hours, a little bit every 2 hours, and then just one big meal at nighttime.
Yeah, and you find out too what works for your body. Like for me, I started out with Cliff Bars and granola. I learned really fast that that's like just throwing dust into a furnace. I mean, I couldn't walk. A Cliff Bar lasted me about 10 minutes, you know, but then I found that I loved eating dried fruit, and that for some reason that stuck with me and really gave me fuel. So you find out yourself what works for you and what doesn't. And it really is very personal. Your body, what your body tells you, you know, what you need.
Right. Yep. And when we would go into a town, I would head in the grocery store. I'd go straight for the chocolate milk and the ice cream, and I'd get a quart of chocolate milk, and I'd get a half gallon of ice cream, and and then I'd have a stomach ache, and Tracy would look at me and say, "Dad, you know you shouldn't have done that." And I'd say, "But it tasted so good." And 2 hours later, it was all gone. You know,
I confess that I had a bit of a Hostess ho-ho addiction there going for a while.
Oh, that's great. Well, we're at the 8 o'clock hour. I think we've answered everybody's questions, except the last question that I have is if we can make them quick. And it's, I'll be asking all my guests. And particularly, we touched on the impact of COVID and the increase in the use of our outdoor spaces. So is there something you could share with our audience about what we can do to protect our spaces? Whether it's a leave no trace principle or something you'd like to share that we could all do so that we can all enjoy the trail even better.
Yeah, ladies, especially, please bury your toilet paper. It's, do like the cat, not like the dog. All you have to do is get that toilet paper into as much contact as possible with the soil, and it will be gone in days. But if you leave it nicely perched on a stump or something, it's going to sit there for everybody to have to look at for the next 3 weeks. So, you can just kick with your heel or your toe, an indentation in the soil, mat it down in there with your toe of your boot, and then just kick some soil over it, and you're fine. But I'm seeing a lot of what they call toilet paper flowers blooming in the forest, and it's very unappealing.
Yep.
Yeah, and I don't feel, where especially in COVID, I don't feel like I can pick that kind of stuff up and carry it out, So that I'm seeing a lot of that. I think, and to be fair, people just don't know. They just don't know what to do,
Right.
When they have to go to the bathroom in the woods.
And I would add, one thing I advised the thru-hikers coming through our area is I really recommend that they not stay in the shelters right now. All of the shelters north of Front Royal that are administered by the National Park Service are still officially closed. They don't look closed because there's no door to them. There's no lock. Some of the privies have locks on them, but the privies and shelters are still technically closed, but they're heavily used. And they're used by a lot of people who don't have that much experience hiking and overnighting, because there's so many people coming out onto the trail right now to escape being locked at home. And I think that's a good thing, but it brings the challenges of hygiene that Sonia was talking about. So I advise hikers that for right now, I wouldn't stay in the shelter. Maybe tent or hammock nearby because that's where the water sources are. But you don't know who was in the shelter the night before you. You don't know what their hygiene practices were. So just to be safe, I would avoid them.
And I would just say, if you want to prevent trail magic, it's a lovely thing, but the problem is that the food that's left and the trash ends up accumulating, or the ants and wildlife get into it, and then nobody really wants to eat it. So if you're going to provide trail magic, stay with it and clean it up afterwards.
Excellent, good point. I think I would add to that, pack out what you pack in. So if you're carrying a water bottle or you have snacks, if you complete that bottle of water, or you eat that snack while you're on the trail, take that out with you. Don't drop it on the side of the trail, or worse yet, don't leave it at the trailhead parking lot, because we're finding piles of water bottles and snack wrappers and things like that. So just take it with you. It'll just keep it a little bit cleaner for the rest of us. And if you do see, there are organizations that we regularly will schedule cleanup days and provide gloves and bags so that, we can go out there and pick up what is left behind. But if we're all packing out what we pack in, it'll make that job a little bit easier and maybe not have to schedule so many of those cleanup days. But the other thing that I also recommend to people, check out your local organizations, trail clubs, walking clubs, hiking clubs, and get involved and see what you can do to help the trail, even if it's just using the trail, helping people know about it, learn how to lead a group if you'd like to do that, or you know, just share your experiences and get involved with the community. I also encourage that. We at the Warren County Front Royal Appalachian Trail Community Committee are always looking for volunteers, and we run all sorts of programming throughout the year with guided hikes, hiker feeds, and all sorts of things as COVID permits. And we also, for those of you, it'll be in the resources, but we also sponsor the Question and Do It program. So questing is kind of like geocaching, but it's a place-based education treasure hunt. So it will be a series of clues written in prose, and you figure out the clues, and it'll take you from place to place along a trail, and you get to discover things about this trail or learn how to ID a tree or something like that. And we have several in the Front Royal area. Some that are in downtown Front Royal, some take you out to the Appalachian Trail, and one will take you down to Andy-Guest State Park down on 340. So we encourage you to check those out as well. They're great fun for kids, but also for adults too, because they take you to some fun spots and you'll learn some neat things. So at this time, I just want to thank everybody for joining us tonight. A special thanks to Sonia and to Scott and Lisa for agreeing to be so generous with their time tonight and their stories and sharing what they've learned about the Appalachian Trail and their life here in Front Royal after their hikes. And I look forward to more fun times with them. So Barbara, I turn it back over to you. If you have any other messages to share with our audience tonight.
Thank you. I share the joy everybody's had with a wonderful program, and appreciate the wonderful stories and the beautiful details. I will be sending out the email with those travel or hiking resources to all those that have registered. Feel free to share it if somebody wasn't able to attend tonight. This will be on YouTube, on the library's YouTube in a few days. So if you want to go there and direct friends and family to take up the opportunity to see this great program, and come back in March for our next program. Thank you.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thanks again, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Find your
Susan.
trail
Thanks,
and hike
Barbara.
it.
Bye-bye.